Hi, my name's Bob Brown and welcome to No Particular Topic. In this installment, I'm going to go over one of my old traffic homicide cases. This one, it kind of wrecked me because there was so much politics involved with this and it was a nightmare. Anyway, it happened on February, I think, 18th, 2007. And around just after, I guess, 1:30 in the morning, I get a phone call because I was the on-call guy at that time. And the phone rang and my wife answers the phone and, Bob, it's the station. I'm like, ay. So I answer the phone and they said, well, they always say the same thing. I'm really sorry, Corporal Brown, but we have a confirmed 7 at Broward and 41. Well, 7 is the short code for signal 7, which means fatality. And I said, okay, put me on the clock. I'm on my way. I always say that because if they're going to call me at that time in the morning, I want to be on the clock. So my wife gets up, scrambles me a couple of eggs like really fast and made me a cup of coffee, and out the door I went. And well, I get there and this one involved a Collier County Sheriff's deputy vehicle and a civilian vehicle. I'm going to divide this into two parts. Part one is the foundation or essence of the crash itself. And part two is going to be the nightmarish onslaught, politically speaking, what took place afterwards. And it was something. And the title of this one will make a lot more sense, especially in part two. All right. Well, this crash took place at US 41 and Broward Street in Collier County, Florida. US 41 is also known as the Tamiami Trail and State Road 90, which is 3 names, just like a serial killer. Just as a reminder, this crash occurred on February 18th, 2007, about 1:30 a.m. The blue arrow at the top points to Vehicle 1, which was kind of the at-fault vehicle. I'll explain more about that later. The red arrow just off to the left there points to Vehicle 2, which was a Collier County Sheriff's patrol car. That image at the top is a scale diagram of this crash. I do plan to go over what led up to this crash and all of the mayhem which ensued thereafter. Police departments, generally speaking, break their counties up into zones. And what happens is when you come out for your shift, you get assigned a particular zone. You could have 1 zone, 2 zones. It just depends on how many people are out. And in this case, there were 2 deputies assigned to a particular zone, and they were the ones involved with this crash. Yes, 2 deputies. Anyway, just prior to this crash, there was an incident which took place in a completely different zone. And I could hear on the transmissions, was that my voice? Anyway, I could hear on the transmissions, well, 2 deputies responding to that incident. Not my deputies from this crash. They were deputies from that other zone. Well, what happened was a supervisor arrived and he determined, well, this is really nothing, and canceled everybody. Meanwhile, the next transmission you hear is a deputy coming on, informing that there's a crash and to send FHP. That's me, because there's a fatality involved. Well, the 2 deputies, which were not, remember, not in that other zone, they went to that incident at a very high speed. Well, they never told anybody. They're not on any transmissions, nothing. They went without lights and sirens, and meanwhile, there's some guy who turned left in front of the deputy, and boom. Here's what I saw when I got there. This is what I saw when I first arrived on scene. Right now, we're on westbound US 41 approaching the intersection of Broward Street. As for those cones and markers, I put those there. I put them there to reconstruct the scene, which I did with photogrammetry and traditional measurements. Look at that arrow. It points to a smudge in the upper right-hand corner. That smudge will appear in pretty much all of the night pictures. Apparently, I got some grease on the lens and I just didn't see it. That was the first time that's ever happened to me. But luckily, it was in an area that didn't affect the images. Photogrammetry is nothing more than a method to capture a scene in a 3D space. One method is with a laser scanner, like this one made by Leica. Did I use that one? No! That thing's $85,000. You think the state's going to spend $85,000 on anything? No, it ain't going to happen. So, what I ended up using was another method. Does it work? Yes, and it still is photogrammetry. And that is those high contrast markers you see there, and along with a digital camera and a program called Eyewitness. And what you would do is take multiple photographs of the scene at different angles, and the letter A appears in all of the photographs. Well, not all of them, a certain amount of photographs. And you had to take at least 4 or 5 images which consistently had a particular letter in it. So, for example, letter A has to appear in 4 or 5 photographs at different angles. Well, same thing for letter B, C, D, and so on and so on. Well, on top of that, I used traditional measurements. And that's right there also, and that's the tape measure and the roller measure. That's the traditional method of taking measurements in general. It works great. It's a little more labor intensive, but that's what everyone ever used before there was anything digital. And I used that most of my career. Anyway, it does work. In this instance, I used a combination of photogrammetry with those traditional measurements. Now, the problem you're going to run into with a 3D image like that is it doesn't know where to go. It just floats in the air. So when you produce that image, it doesn't know a location. It doesn't know how to get back to its original spot. So in order to do that, you have to create what's called a 0 point and a reference line. And you know what? Let me just show you that real quick. Here's a daytime shot of the very first image I showed you. Here's where I put my marker for the 0 point. It's where the white edge line of the outside lane intersects with the line for the stop bar. I used that same edge line for my reference line. So now we have a 0 point and a reference line. And because of these two things, we can place my entire scale drawing right back to its original location. If you look at the image to my left, your right, and you'll see an image there that represents a good example of how the 0 point and reference line works. It's really simple. All it is everything on the reference line is a y coordinate, and everything to the right or left of that is an x coordinate. So for example, if there's evidence at 3 feet east of the 0 point, then you'd mark that on a piece of paper on a legend sheet. And then you would also include the other direction, the x-coordinate, which would be, let's say it's off to the left or the south, then let's say it's 3 feet again. It's 3 feet south of the 0 point. And the whole scene you do just like that. It's really simple. You could do that with pretty much anything. You could use it to find a dead body you buried in your backyard again if you use a 0 point and a reference line. And don't do that. Just bad example. Anyway, if you look off to the left, that green arrow points to what's called a drag sled. It's how you get the friction of the road. It's a bit crude, but it does work. You drag that across the road with a spring-loaded delier attached, which is nothing more than a fish scale. I then have to pull that sled with the delier parallel to the roadway to get a number which appears on that delier. Then I have to convert that number to get the friction of the roadway. In this case, it was 0.83, which, by the way, is pretty typical for this type of roadway. It's usually 0.83 or 0.85 or somewhere around there. I'll then take that 0.83 and plug it into my speed calculations. By the way, that friction measurement of the roadway is also called coefficient of friction, which is essentially my drag factor. Here's some more photos from the scene. As for this image, it might look like a confusing mess to the average person, but take my word for it. It's really not hard to figure out what happened here. You have all kinds of tire transfer marks. You have someone who, or some people who drove through an oil slick, leaving marks. You have scrape marks. It's not hard to figure it out. You start from where the crash occurred, and you follow from that point up to the final rest of each vehicle. And look, this is pretty much what you have to contend with at almost all crashes. We'll talk more about that area of collision later on. Now let's take a quick look at the crash damage to each vehicle, the red car and the patrol car. Here's the patrol car at its final rest at the scene. This is a comparison of a day shot, pretty much at the same angle, with the scene shot. Notice the shot on the right has cones with markers, and it also has markers on the ground and dots all over the car. That's all a setup for photogrammetry. And these last two shots show the patrol car at a different angle. The damage is very clean and specific. It may look like a mess, but in reality, it's very specific. Here's the red car. The shot on the left is at the scene. The one on the right is at the wrecker yard. Again, you'll see cones and dots all over that car. Those are all for photogrammetry. Here's a couple of really good shots of the crush damage. Later, I'm going to show you how these two vehicles fit together like a glove. Now let's go over the area of collision. I call it area of collision because of lawyers. If you say point of collision, they'll scrutinize it to death with, oh, that's not the point there. Well, if you just say area of collision, they just leave you alone. Anyway, I want to show you how I was able to determine the correct angles for this crash, and it's extremely important. I have the angle, and I'll show you how I got that angle, for the patrol car as well as the red car. Let's take a look at that. This first photo is a really good shot of the area of collision. Here's another one which we'll talk about right now. The green arrow shows where the right side undercarriage of the red car impacted and scraped along the roadway. That scrape mark also provides the angle of collision for that red car. It also provides its departure angle, which are the scrapes going away from that area of collision. The blue arrow shows the same thing, only this time it's the patrol car. I placed that green line right on the edge of where the red vehicle's undercarriage struck and scraped the roadway. That's its angle of collision. That yellow line depicts exactly the same thing, only this time for the patrol car. And here's both angles as they cross over each other. And finally, here's the to-scale diagram of this crash. That's my 0 point on the reference line. The next arrow, that's the area of collision. And the next arrow is the patrol car's area of final rest. And finally, the last arrow, all the way to the left, is the area of final rest for the red car. And to give you just an idea of how hard that red car got hit, it traveled 277 feet after impact to its area of final rest. And let's just say this, that's a lot of distance, which equals to a lot of speed. Speaking of speed, in my report, I showed a speed of 98 miles per hour for the deputy. However, his actual speed was 114. So why didn't I put 114? Because I'm an idiot. I should have put 114. It was brought to my attention, if you get my drift, it would be better to put 98 than 114. Well, how do you get 98 from 114? You do it by leaving out part of the formula. That last little bit of the formula was called rotational analysis. And it's very difficult to prove in court. And I caved, I guess. To this day, I regret that I did that. But his actual speed was 114. It was 114.21 miles per hour. And yeah, I don't know why I did that. But anyway, in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter because, 98 is still a lot of speed. So I'm not going to mention 98 ever again from this point forward in this video or in part 2. I'm going to stick with the 114 because that was the speed I came up with. Let's take a really quick look at the calculations. Here's 3 pages from my speed calculations. There were more pages, but, well, this is all I have left after all of these years. The first one is 27.79 miles per hour, and that was the red car. As far as the deputy's concerned, this includes his rotational analysis. So, the speed with that was 114.21 miles per hour. Minus that, it's 98. Well, that's pretty much it for part 1. It was a pretty straightforward crash, right? And the sheriff's department looked at the case. They thought, well, looks pretty good to us. I went ahead and issued the appropriate charges. Everything went great. The sheriff's department applied their disciplinary action to their deputy. And, well, that was that, right? No, of course that's not right. This case became a nightmare. It's like I made a left turn and I went into the twilight zone. I got thrown under the bus. And this case was in and out of the news for over a year. And that's what we're going to talk about in part 2. If interested, I do have another YouTube channel. It's called 8 and 35mm Restoration. On that channel, I posted a whole bunch of my old home movies. Some of them I shot in sound and some were silent. Of the silent ones, I did add some music, voiceovers, and sound effects on some of them. I also have a whole bunch of tutorials on how to digitize and process 8mm movies, still photography slides, photographs, and negatives. If you're interested, I did put a link in the description below.